Welcome to my channel. A quiet, tech girl in a remote command shack was never meant to touch a rifle until her unit was trapped in a kill box with no way out. From the frozen heights of Deadman's Tooth, she became the unseen hand that turns certain death into survival. But saving them once awakens a past she's fought to bury and calls her back to the ridge that never forgot her. Some ridges feel like they've been waiting for you your whole life. I learned that truth the hard way. The first time I heard the gunfire echo down Greywater Gorge, I wasn't even supposed to be there. My assignment was clear: sit behind a laptop in the command shack, log radio chatter, process terrain data. I was just the tech, the quiet girl in the weatherproof jacket with a thermos always in hand. People in the unit barely noticed me except to hand over a thumb drive or ask me if the network was still glitching. They sure didn't think I could put a round through a man's scope from 2 miles away. That morning had been ugly from the start. A 6-person recon team had gone into the gorge to track down a suspected enemy relay point. They were tough people, Green River Special Operations, the kind who could vanish for days and reappear smelling like smoke and cedar, carrying intel no drone could have sniffed out. But this time, they walked right into an ambush. Comms went dead in under 6 minutes. Last thing I heard before the static swallowed them was the clipped report of someone saying, "We're boxed." Then nothing. I could see their location on my screen, 6 blinking dots trapped in the gut of a canyon that chewed up any kind of signal. I'd walked that canyon before. I knew exactly what it could do to you. Back in the shack, nobody panicked, at least not out loud. You could feel the tension, though, pressing against the plywood walls. Captain Miles kept his voice steady as he tried to raise them on the backup frequency. Sergeant Cross hovered over my shoulder like he could will the screen to tell him more than it was. Me? I just kept my hands on the keys, pretending I was logging every detail, while my mind was already halfway up a mountain. Greywater Ridge, locals called it Deadman's Tooth, was the only high ground with a clear view into that canyon. On paper it was inaccessible. In reality, it was just mean, steep, and lonely. The brass didn't think it was worth the trouble. I did. I knew exactly how far it was from our little prefab command post. 4 kilometers in a straight line, but the climb would tear the air from your lungs before you got halfway. If you didn't know its tricks, it'd chew you up and spit you out before you ever saw the view. There was a rifle in our armory that everyone had written off, an old M2010, tagged unreliable in red block letters. Scope drift, they said, couldn't hold 0 in the cold. I'd walked past it a dozen times, biting my tongue. The rifle wasn't the problem, it was the mount. It was built for flatland shots, not for the kind of steep, high-angle shooting the ridge demanded. I'd already fixed it weeks ago, quiet as a shadow, when nobody was watching. When Miles muttered, "No high ground with line of sight," I knew the decision was already made inside me. I slid my headset onto the desk, stood up, and walked out. No clearance, no announcement. Just grabbed the rifle, 3 mags, and started toward the ridge. The climb was brutal in that late winter air. Ice crusted the rock faces, brittle snow breaking underfoot. My breath came steady, not because it was easy, but because I'd learned to pace my pulse with every step. The wind on the tooth rotated in 40-minute cycles. If you knew when to crest, you could hit a window of relative calm. If you didn't, the gusts would turn your barrel into a weather vane. I made the top in 14 minutes flat. Below me, the recon team was pinned so tight they could barely lift their heads. Machine gun bursts chewed chunks from the rock around them, while enemy flanking squads closed in from 2 sides. If they broke, the canyon would finish them. The first shot cracked like snapping ice. The gunner dropped where he stood. From that distance, in that wind, most people wouldn't have even tried. But I wasn't most people. The second round went out before the first shell casing stopped spinning in the snow. Dropped a spotter with binoculars halfway up the far slope. No one ever tells you how much more important the spotters are than the gunners. You take them out, you cut the enemy's eyes right out of their head. I let the rifle settle. Wind gust, count to 4, breaks to a lull. The third shot took out a squad leader waving his arms to rally the flankers. He went down in a heap. Everything in the canyon stopped moving for a beat, like they were trying to puzzle out where death had just come from. The chatter in their language, clipped, urgent, carried up to me in pieces. High ground, impossible move back. Exactly what I wanted. Back in the gorge, the Green River team was hugging the dirt, trying to figure out if I was friend or foe. From where they were lying, they couldn't see me, only the thin breath of vapor curling off the ridge. I kept my shots clean, deliberate. No spray, no showmanship. You start blasting like a lunatic. You scare everybody, friend included. Surgical was the word. Precise enough that someone would have to be paying very close attention to realize I wasn't just lucky. After the fourth round, their line broke like a branch under too much snow. The flanking squad started peeling away, two at a time, trying to disappear into the folds of the canyon. The machine gun fire died down. The recon team lifted their heads, but stayed flat. Smart. I adjusted my angle, sweeping the slope for any last-ditch push. My scope picked up movement. A runner, probably a radio operator, bolting toward higher ground. Not today. The fifth shot felt like an exhale. His radio tumbled down the rock face. By now, the whole canyon was unraveling. I could see the enemy pulling back in clumps, discipline breaking. They'd expected to box in a small recon team. They hadn't planned for a ghost with a long gun parked in the one place their own intel said couldn't be reached. Somewhere down below, Sergeant Cross's voice cracked to life over the team's emergency channel. Unknown sniper, identify yourself. Say again, friendly sniper, confirm position. I didn't answer. Didn't even think about it. From their point of view, they'd been saved by an invisible hand. From mine, I'd just stopped history from repeating itself. By the time they started their withdrawal, I was already breaking down the rifle. My footprints would be snow-filled within the hour. The tooth doesn't like to leave evidence. When I ghosted back into the shack 17 minutes later, Miles was still hunched over the comms board, his headset clamped tight. Cross was pacing like a man who'd just survived a coin toss he didn't want to take. Both froze when they saw me. "You been here the whole time?" Miles asked, half a frown on his face. "Right here," I said, sliding my laptop open like I'd never left. He studied me a second too long, but didn't push it. Some questions answer themselves if you ask them in the wrong tone. The M2010 was back in its rack before the armory guard even knew it was missing. 3 rounds lighter. Barrel still warm enough to burn your hand. They'd never know what had happened up on Deadman's tooth. Not officially. Not unless they went digging where they weren't cleared to dig. And nobody here had clearance for me. 3 years earlier, I'd walked out of Greywater Gorge alone. No radio. No food worth mentioning. No team. The official report says my unit, call sign Timberline 9, was lost in action during a reconnaissance sweep of the Northern Divide. Lost is a polite word. Makes it sound like we wandered into the wrong valley and couldn't find the trail home. Truth is, we walked straight into a kill box because the intel was bad, or maybe because someone wanted it that way. It was supposed to be a quiet sector. Low foot traffic, minimal enemy presence. We were to set up forward observation posts, track supply routes, and keep an eye on weather movements that could ground air resupply. But when we got to the mouth of the gorge, the whole place was alive with fighters, more than we could handle, all in position before we even realized what we'd stepped into. We could have turned back. We didn't, because coming up the road below us, right in range of enemy artillery, was a convoy of civilians. Families. Kids. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time, about to get wiped out. Our lieutenant didn't waste a breath. We hold. Buy them time. No matter what. We split into 3 positions. I took overwatch from Deadman's Tooth, the one place in the sector with a complete view of both the road and the enemy's staging grounds. My orders were clear. Track movements. Report targeting coordinates. Stay dark on the trigger until told otherwise. The fight went bad fast. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of range for anyone to save us. Our comms got chewed up by jamming before the first hour ended. I could still hear them, though. My people, through the sporadic bursts and broken fragments. Even without words, I knew when each one of them fell silent. By the 3rd day, the only voices in my headset were ghosts. The enemy, thinking they'd cleared the ridge, started moving artillery toward the convoy's escape route. That was the first time I broke silence. 3 shots, 3 forward observers dropped. They couldn't aim what they couldn't see. The convoy made it out. It cost me my cover. They hunted me for 6 days straight. The mountain kept me alive. I moved only when snow squalls or low cloud could mask my heat signature. Slept in shallow rock cradles with the rifle beside me, scope pointed downhill. Ate whatever crumbs I had left. Melted snow in a tin cup for water. My hands went numb so bad I couldn't feel the trigger after the first night, but my aim never drifted. When you've got nothing left but the job, you don't miss. On the 6th day, a rescue unit found me exactly where I'd started, still on the ridge, still watching the valley. I remember their medic looking at me like I was something half-wild they'd trapped in a net. He kept saying, "You're safe now," like I'd believe it. Safe didn't stick. I put in for reassignment the minute I could hold a pen. No more front lines. No more orders that sent good people into meat grinders. I went into analysis, comms, logistics, quiet work in quiet corners. If I had my way, Deadman's tooth would stay a nightmare in my head and nowhere else. But here's the thing about places like that. They don't forget you. And if you're not careful, they call you back. The thing about hiding in plain sight is, you start believing your own cover story. For 3 years, I told myself I was just the data girl in a remote command shack. A ghost with a badge, invisible in the mess hall, a shadow in morning briefings. I had my rituals: coffee at 0500, perimeter walk at lunch, headset always around my neck. Nobody asked questions, and I made sure they didn't get answers. But after that day in the gorge, after the recon team walked back into base breathing only because someone on the ridge had cut the enemy's teeth out, it was harder to stay just another anonymous analyst. It started with the looks. Miles would glance at me in passing like he'd just caught a flicker of something he wasn't supposed to see. Cross would hang in the doorway of the comms room a beat longer than necessary. Even the armory guard started checking the rifle rack more often, like he knew one of his problem children had suddenly learned good manners. The team itself came in last, still dust-caked and bruised. They weren't grinning, but there was a current in their eyes, something that wasn't there before. Respect, maybe, or the quiet acknowledgement soldiers give each other when words won't do. Their captain, Vega, found me at my workstation. He stood there for a full 10 seconds before saying, "Whoever that was up on the tooth, tell him thanks." I didn't look up from my keyboard. If I see them, I'll pass it on. We both knew that was the end of it, for now. That night, I went back to the armory. The M2010 sat in its place, spotless, bolt locked back, scope dialed exactly where I'd left it after the final shot. My own handwriting on the maintenance tag read, "Serviceable." The guard raised an eyebrow when I walked past. I kept going. In my quarters, I unrolled the faded cloth from my duffel. Inside was the patch I'd kept since Timberline 9, threadbare, edges frayed. The mountain had taught me to live with ghosts, but it had also taught me something else. You don't always get to choose when you come back. Miles called me in the next morning. No accusations, just a file folder slid across the desk. Inside were grainy long-lens shots of the gorge, timestamps that matched my missing 17 minutes. And there, faint as frost, the outline of a shooter prone on Deadman's tooth. He didn't say, "Was this you?" He didn't have to. "You know," he said quietly. "The official report's going to say you never left this shack." I closed the folder. Then it'll be a good report. We sat in silence for a while, both knowing the truth was going nowhere except between us. Finally, he said, "Next time, you won't wait for it to come to you. Next time, I'll call you in." It wasn't an order. It was an invitation back into the world I'd been avoiding. I didn't answer, but in my gut, I already knew my days of hiding were over. It started small. A question over morning coffee from a young comms tech about wind drift. A sniper from another unit asking if I'd ever tried shooting without a rangefinder. I'd give short answers at first, nothing that would raise eyebrows, but soon those short answers turned into demonstrations. "Look at the tree line," I told one corporal. "Notice how the leaves on the east side are moving faster? That means the wind's shifting up top before it hits you down here. It's going to change your shot whether you feel it or not." Word got around fast. Not about me. Exactly. Just about that woman in the shack who knows things. The kind of things you don't find in manuals. By the end of the month, I'd have 2 or 3 people posted near my corner of the yard before sunrise, pretending they were just passing through, listening as I talked about the ridge, about shadow movement, about how snow can tell you more about an enemy than their radio chatter ever will. I never called it training, but that's what it was. One afternoon, a Green River sergeant named Holt asked if I'd come out to the range. Not to shoot, he promised. Just tell my guys what they're missing. So I stood behind a row of young shooters and watched. Most of them rushed their shots, fingers jerking the triggers like they were swatting flies. Their scopes were clean, their rifles zeroed, but their eyes weren't open. You're not here to hit a bullseye, I told them. You're here to know why you hit it. Or why you missed. I pointed out the heat shimmer above the dirt berm, the way it would warp a target at range. Showed them how a bird call can warn you of a target moving through brush before you see them. We even went silent for 10 minutes, listening to the wind talk in its slow, patient language. By the end, they were fidgeting less, breathing more. One of them, a kid named Ruiz, finally asked, "Ma'am, how do you know all this?" I smiled without humor. Because once upon a time, I didn't. And I watched people die because of it. That shut him up. But it also made him pay attention. Within weeks, the casual lessons turned into something closer to a program. Not formal, no paperwork, just small groups meeting at odd hours, climbing ridges in bad weather, sitting in snow with binoculars and empty hands. I told them, a rifle is the last part of the shot. Everything before it matters more. The wind teaches you. The terrain tells you. The rest is just follow through. They started calling me Ghost Sight when they thought I couldn't hear. I didn't correct them. I've been called worse. I wasn't ready to admit it out loud, but the truth was simple. I'd stepped back into the role I'd sworn off. Only this time, I wasn't pulling a trigger for myself. I was making sure they'd know how to pull theirs, if the ridge ever called them the way it called me. It was late February when I picked the ones who'd make the climb. 6 soldiers from different units. Not the best shooters, not the loudest leaders, just the ones who'd been listening when the wind spoke. They thought they were coming for a shooting exercise. I didn't tell them otherwise. We set out before dawn, the cold biting hard enough to make your breath feel solid in your throat. The first part of the trail was a lie, gentle slopes, open ground, the kind of climb that makes you think you've got this in the bag. But the tooth doesn't start telling the truth until the 2nd kilometer. The ridge rises fast there, jagged rock and slick snow crust. You have to use your hands as much as your feet. I set a steady pace, never looking back. If they couldn't keep up, the mountain would decide for them. By the time we hit the halfway mark, the sky was bleeding pale gold over the horizon. I stopped, letting them catch their breath. They didn't realize yet that the climb was the point. Look down, I told them. Not at the ground, at the land. Trace every gully, every fold. That's how you see where trouble moves before it shows itself. They followed my gaze, some squinting, some nodding like they understood. I could tell they didn't. Not yet. The last push to the summit was the real test. Exposed rock face, wind funneled straight into your chest. You lean too far forward, you burn out. Too far back, you slip. The tooth likes to find the smallest weakness in your body and grind at it until you wish you'd stayed home. We crested just as the wind shifted, 40-minute cycle, right on time. I led them to the flat where I'd lain those years ago, the place that still carried the ghosts of my first and worst stand. This, I said, is where you learn why you came. I had no rifles for them, just binoculars and notepads. Pick a sector, I told them. Watch. Listen. Write down what you see and what you think you see. Don't talk. At first they looked confused. Then the quiet settled in, the way it does when the mountain decides to let you in on her secrets. Birds went still. A distant rumble rolled down the gorge. A loose drift of snow shifted against the wind, sign of something moving below. An hour later, Ruiz broke the silence. "Ma'am, those shadows by the bend in the gorge, they're wrong." I didn't smile, but inside, I knew he'd just crossed a threshold. Good. Now tell me why. By midday, they were seeing things they'd have missed yesterday. Boot prints that didn't match the patrol's path, steam trails rising from a shaded gully, the rhythm of wind gusts that could ruin a long shot if you didn't count them. Before we started down, I took them to the stone where I'd once left a single unfired round. It was gone now, probably buried under seasons of snow, but the lesson was still there. This ridge, I said, isn't just a place you climb. It's a promise. If you ever have to take this ground for real, you finish the job. Getting out comes second. Nobody spoke. The wind carried our silence away like it knew better than to keep it. It didn't take long for word to leak out. Not about me, nobody said my name, but about the climb. They called it different things in different units. The 40-minute wind, the ghost's path, the tooth march. But it always meant the same thing. Hauling yourself up Deadman's tooth to see what the mountain would tell you. It started with the 6 I'd taken. A week after that first climb, Ruiz and 2 others went up on their own. I found them halfway down, wind-chapped and grinning like they'd stolen something valuable. They said nothing to me, but their eyes told me the tooth had started talking to them. Then more came. Quietly. Always in pairs or threes. Rangers, comms operators, even a medic from the air wing who'd never fired a shot in anger, but swore she needed to understand the ridge thing for herself. I didn't run these climbs. Sometimes I'd see them heading out before dawn and just give a small nod. They knew what to do, what to look for, what the wind meant. And when they came back, they carried themselves differently. Not cocky, just more anchored. Like the land had put a weight in their chest that kept their feet steady. The tooth was doing the teaching now. I was just the one who'd shown them where to knock. Then came the first outsiders. A Marine sniper passing through on joint training. A foreign liaison officer who'd heard some crazy story about a ridge you couldn't hold unless you learned to breathe with it. They'd show up at the mess hall table where I was sitting, not asking directly, but with that look in their eyes, the one that says, I want in. I never advertised. But if someone came to me straight, I'd point them toward the trail and say, climb it. Take your time. Leave something behind when you leave. Soon, people started leaving things. A shell casing etched with initials. A scrap of cloth from an old uniform. A folded slip of paper wedged under a stone. No one ever touched what wasn't theirs. The mountain kept the offerings like a locked box. I realized then what was happening. The tooth was becoming more than a training ground. It was turning into a quiet kind of altar, not to me, but to the promise I'd made up there years ago. A place where the serious ones came to remember why they fight, and why they'd never quit mid-climb. One evening, I found a note left in my quarters. No name, just 4 words in sharp handwriting. You kept them alive. I didn't need to ask who it was from, or who them meant. The tooth was keeping its own history now. And history, once it starts writing itself, doesn't stop just because you think you're done with it. It happened the way winter comes to the tooth. Quietly at first, so you hardly notice. One morning, I just didn't join them on the pre-dawn climb. No explanation. No note. I stood at the edge of the compound instead, watching the line of headlamps bobbing toward the trail, listening to the faint crunch of boots in hard snow. They didn't turn back. They didn't need me to. By then, they knew the ridge better than some of the old hands I'd served with. They knew how to read the wind's 40-minute cycle, how to hear the shift in a snowbank that says something's moving beneath it. They knew the sound of silence that meant they weren't alone. My part was done. The day I left was colder than usual. I'd packed light, a standard hiking pack, a change of clothes, a battered thermos. No rifles. No sidearm. I cleaned the M2010-1 last time, set it on the rack with the bolt open, and slid the tag over the trigger guard, serviceable. On my desk, I left a small notebook. First page was blank except for one line. I don't leave traces. I leave vision. I slipped out at 0347, the camp still asleep. The tooth loomed dark against the sky, half hidden by slow-moving clouds. My boots crunched over the frozen path toward the trailhead, where the climb begins. I didn't look back. By midday, they realized I was gone. By nightfall, the search parties had gone out. 3 days later, they came back empty-handed. No one found footprints past the halfway point. No one found my pack. Not even the scraps of paper and shell casings left by others on the summit were disturbed. It was as if the ridge had simply taken me back. Some said I'd gone to another posting under a different name. Others claimed I'd gone deep cover for some operation that wouldn't make sense until years from now. But a few, the ones who'd made the climb with me, had a different idea. They said I'd gone home, that the mountain had called me the way it had before, and this time, I'd answered without hesitation. I never told them the truth. Some things you leave in the mist because they're stronger that way. If I thought the tooth would fade without me, I was wrong. It only grew louder. The climbs didn't stop. In fact, they multiplied. My old students started leading them, though they never called themselves instructors. They'd take 2 or 3 newcomers up at a time, sometimes in daylight, sometimes at night, depending on what the wind was doing. They made people earn it the way I had made them earn it. Slow steps, open eyes, no shortcuts. The offerings on the summit multiplied, too. A jagged piece of shrapnel wrapped in twine. A strip of desert camo with LO stitched into the hem. A sniper's dope card laminated against the snow. One thing never changed. No one touched what wasn't theirs. The ridge had rules, and everyone understood them without being told. Somewhere along the line, stories started drifting between outposts. In one version, the ghost on the tooth had been a sniper who'd saved an entire convoy single-handed. In another, She'd been a forward observer so good she could call artillery fire without optics. In the wilder tales, she could vanish into fog and reappear behind enemy lines like the wind itself had carried her. Nobody argued which story was true. Nobody wanted to. It went beyond our patch of country. Rangers from the Plains units started showing up on leave just to make the climb. A Navy corpsman once came all the way inland after hearing, "About this hill you have to see if you want to understand patience." Even a couple of Allied operators, men and women from organizations whose names were never said out loud, made the pilgrimage. They all went up quiet. They all came down changed. One spring, a plaque appeared on the summit. No one ever admitted to putting it there. It was just a square of weathered brass bolted to the stone where I'd once lain for 3 days and nights. It read, "She taught us to breathe with the mountain. She taught us to see before we aimed." We don't miss because she didn't. I heard about it secondhand. And I'll admit, when I pictured it catching the morning sun up there on that wind-cut ridge, something in my chest pulled tight. The tooth wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who needed it. I used to think the tooth had taken everything from me. My team, my sense of safety, the belief that I could walk into a mission and come out the same person I went in as. For years I carried that place like a scar I didn't want anyone to see. But time does strange things to pain. It doesn't erase it. It turns it. Sharp edges smooth, just enough that you can touch them without bleeding. You start to see what the wound left behind. The tooth didn't just take. It gave me something, too. Patience that runs deeper than fear. A way of seeing the land that keeps you alive. The knowledge that when it matters most, I will move, no matter what orders say. Those are gifts worth passing on. And whether I wanted it or not, I did. Sometimes, I hear the stories trickling back, about a young sniper who nailed a 600-meter shot in shifting crosswinds because she remembered to count the 40 minutes. About a patrol that avoided an ambush because one corporal noticed the bird calls had stopped. About a medic who saved her own team by holding a ridge long enough for reinforcements, using nothing but patience and the terrain. They don't say my name. They don't have to. If the lesson is alive, the teacher is still there. Every now and then, someone swears they've seen me. A figure halfway up the climb, moving steady but not fast. A shadow lying prone on the summit stone, watching the gorge through a battered scope. Always gone before anyone can get close enough to say hello. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're just seeing what they need to. The tooth is more than rock and wind to me. It's a reminder carved into the spine of the earth. If you're surrounded, look up quietly. And if you're lucky, someone will be there. Not for glory, not for medals, just to keep the promise. I keep mine.